while we begin. And just so you know that this webinar is being recorded. So welcome to all our guests and participants. This is part of the USAPECS webinar series 2023, launching your online science persona. So just to tell you a little bit about us, the USAPECS is part of APEX International, which is an organization geared towards, I'm trying to change my slide, represents the United States as part of the Association of Polar Early Career Scientists. We represent undergraduate and graduate students, postdoctoral researchers, early faculty members, educators, and others interested in the polar regions and the larger cryosphere. This webinar is being conducted with the aid of the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee, IARPC, and with the financial support of the Polar Science Early Career Community Office, POSECO, which is part of the National Science Foundation's awards under the Office of Polar Programs. So just to briefly tell you a little bit about our code of conduct, I will turn the discussion over.
Thanks, Susan. So yeah, USAPECS wants to create a foster a welcoming, safe, productive, and inclusive environment. All participants are asked to remain respectful of others' thoughts and opinions and keep an open mind throughout the meeting. If at any time you have any concerns, we encourage you to reach out to one of the meeting coordinators. Please type any questions or comments you have into the chat. We're also going to open the floor for questions at some point, and you're also welcome to use your digital hand to raise your hand as well. Moderators will communicate any questions in the chat to the speaker, and we ask that you remain muted when not speaking to reduce background noise.
Right, thank you very much. And now on to our speakers.
I guess I can start. I'll introduce myself. Hi, sorry. My name's Kate Bruns. I'm a PhD candidate in communication studies at the University of Minnesota. I study media discourses of water scarcity, which is basically a fancy way of saying media coverage of water crises. So I investigate potable water, irrigation, and also ice loss. Through my research on ice loss, I got involved with the Center for Oldest Ice Exploration. So I work with a knowledge transfer team to better improve our communication within center participants and communication of scientific findings to the general public. Happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Austin Carter. I'm a PhD student at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I'm involved with also the Center of Oldest Ice Exploration with some of the drilling that happens down at the Allen Hills. For my research, I look at dust that gets trapped in the ice cores. So we bring the ice back to the lab and do a bunch of chemistry on it. I've had some great experiences using TikTok to communicate some of the science that I'm doing, and excited to chat with you all more about this stuff.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ariel Morrison. I am a postdoc at Colorado State University. I received my PhD in atmospheric and oceanic sciences from the University of Colorado Boulder, as well as my certificate in college teaching. My research is actually fairly broad. My PhD research focused on relationships between Arctic clouds and sea ice loss. And then during my postdoc, I've been looking at how stratospheric aerosol injection may affect permafrost. And I'm now also going back into looking at how it may affect sea ice. So happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Okay, so we're going to jump in with just a few preset questions and then move on to audience questions. So audience, as you think of things, please write them in the chat or raise your hands. Zach, do you happen to have a question prepared?
Yes, I'll kick us off. So this question is going to be here for Ariel. One of the reasons you're in this panel is because you have an awesome website and use other tools for sort of communicating your publications and your research. And I know for me, at least, I can kind of get overwhelmed by how many things there are, like Google Scholar and ResearchGate. And then you have to have they suggest having a website to talk about your own science. So I just wanted, if you could share, for those of us who like me, again, had no training in website design, and how do you get started if you're interested in creating sort of a personal website to talk about your research and publications, and we'd be interested in hearing your journey about that.
Sure, thanks. So yeah, as you said, there are a lot of different tools out there for showcasing your research online. And when I was applying for jobs, I realized that a really effective way of doing that, and also having a lot of control over the message and the image that I wanted to show, was to make my own website. And when I started doing it, there were a few tools. There were probably a lot more tools than I realized, and now there are so many out there. The tool that I specifically use is Wix, W-I-X, and it's actually, I think, what USAPECS uses as well. I use that because it was the tool that I used for a website design project in grad school, so it was something that I was familiar with. But I also really like it because it is extremely flexible. And one thing that was really key for me when designing my website was to have exactly the layout and exactly the images and exactly the information that I wanted. So depending on how flexible you are and how, I guess, picky you are with exactly how everything looks, you could do a completely blank template in Wix, or it has a lot of really nice pre-made templates that you can use. And I think that's the key for most website design tools. Squarespace is one of them. GitHub is also a nice tool. The nice thing about GitHub is that it is free, and there's also a really wide range of how much control you can have over it. You can do a completely blank web page, or you can start using a template. So if that's a little bit overwhelming, I always suggest looking at different websites that are out there, thinking about the kind of image that you want to show as a scientist. I really like showcasing my outreach and my teaching. So my website is more geared towards a broader audience. If you really wanted to focus on just your research or your GitHub repo or a really specific part of what you do, then you can gear your website towards that. So there are a lot of good, there are also a lot of not so good examples out there. So I would say if you're getting started on a website design, just look at what's out there. And don't be shy about taking elements that you think are really effective from other people's websites. And if anyone has questions about how to use Wix, I'm very happy to answer questions about it. I think other people who use Wix for the APEX website also probably have some good ideas.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ariel. Just to follow up really quickly on that, you mentioned Wix that you use. Is there any cost associated with Wix?
Yeah, great question. Sorry. So the initial package, so just to make a website, it's free. That's really nice. If you want your own personal domain, so mine is just my name, so it makes it really, really easy to search for me and also really easy to tell people what it is, then you have to pay for that. But Wix is free just to start. GitHub is free just to start. I think ChatGPT can make you a website now, and I don't know if there's a cost associated with that. But yeah, there are so many tools out there, and I only know some of them. So yeah, if you're interested in it, I think just start looking around for different free website tools.
All right, we can move on to another prepared question. This one will be for Austin. So, as you mentioned, you use TikTok as a really effective way to communicate science. And, I feel like just a few years ago, we were trying to, quote, sell, to other researchers about the benefits of like Twitter and other social media. Now scientists are starting to use TikTok, but I feel like there's still maybe a smaller community. But the ones like you, have been so successful in reaching a different audience. So I just wonder if you could share with us, how did you get started with TikTok? What's your journey been, positive, negative, associated with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess should start off with saying, like, before I even was posting anything on TikTok, I was like an avid consumer of TikToks. I'm just a very fond of the platform itself. And so I think for me, before even considering that as an option, I think I just was sort of doing my own, as I'm scrolling on TikTok, kind of observing what kind of videos do well and what sort of content people like. And so I think starting with that, I think for me, getting comfortable with the platform was like a first step. And for anyone interested in using TikTok, I strongly recommend just making an account, whether or not it's like a dummy account or whatever, just to make one, start doing your own like research of observing what people are doing, different science TikToks, see what's working well for people, and then just practice. Like, I think even like there's features on TikTok where you can just make the upload private, so just you can see it. And I think there's a lot of unfamiliarity with like the app and how to post. And I think that's a great way for me. What I did before going down to Antarctica is I just made a bunch of practice videos just to see like what are the different features that I can use on the app. Like, how do I how do I actually go about uploading stuff? What does it look like when it is uploaded? Sort of working out all those kinks before I was actually ready to start posting stuff. And once I got to that point, I just created a list on my phone of ideas. And I would just brainstorm whether or not, like, I got out of the shower and had a great idea, like, let me write this down. Or like I was eating lunch and I had an idea, I would write it down. So I had a long list of ideas. Many of them did not make the cut at all. But having that list was a great way to like tap into when I was down in Antarctica, and I was like, oh, maybe I could make a video about how we drink water and what that actually looks like. And so, yeah, I think for me, it was sort of this initial, like, getting comfortable with how the platform works, getting comfortable with how to actually like post and make content, and doing that in a way that was private first before actually putting myself out there. And then just starting brainstorming and actually doing the posting. So that's sort of an abridged version of that process that I did, that I would recommend others to sort of explore if they're interested.
Yeah, see, admittedly, I'm a consumer, I guess you could say, of TikTok, but I have never posted and too scared to post at the moment. But I had no idea you could just make practice videos through the app. Is there like a web interface that you can do this, or is it all done through, when you create your videos, is it all done through the app?
Yes, so there is a web interface, but it isn't good for like editing. In app, there's a really great editor. And I would recommend, like, if you do use TikTok, to just do your editing within the app itself and upload directly from there. There's also a great way where you can just draft videos too. So you don't even have to post anything and make it private. You can just like create drafts. In fact, that's what I would do sometimes in Antarctica, is I would actually create a draft. We had intermittent internet. And so what I would do is I would create a draft, and it would literally just be like me holding my phone down at the ground, and just, so it's literally nothing. And then I would add a sound to that video while we had internet. So it was like cached on the video. So then later on in my sleeping bag, when it was nighttime or whatever, it was like full sun, but I would just do all the editing later on, but I had the sound that I wanted. So like maybe I really wanted like a Beyonce song to go along with whatever content, I would have that already cached in the video in my drafts. And so then I could do all that editing there. And then next time internet was on, I could just go ahead and post that. So there's even like a sort of a lower layer of private videos where you can just have your own little drafts too, which is great. But yeah, I think it's just sort of kind of getting over the sort of initial like uncomfortable, like putting yourself out there, and for that you can just make sort of dummy accounts and test it out. So there's sort of no low stakes. But yeah.
Nope. Yeah, thanks for that. And now we'll turn to Catherine. And I know your one area of expertise is really understanding sort of media and their interactions with scientists and that whole connection. So, for many of us in science, we don't really get any formal training on how to communicate our work, let alone how do we talk to a journalist who wants to talk to us in an interview. And I'd just be curious from, your area of research and expertise, or if you could start off with some scientists, like what do we do well sometimes when we talk with journalists? What do we not do so well? And just sort of give us an overview of that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think when I hear scientists or researchers really more generally talking about the media, What I often feel is lacking is kind of a more nuanced understanding of what the media is, as opposed to just like a homogenous entity. So even in my research, like I study media coverage, but I specify in newspaper journalism. I know very little about radio or television or podcasts or social media like Austin, and those are entirely different beasts. And so I think it's really important when scientists are contacted by a journalist, or perhaps when they, want to communicate their research to a media representative, to be a little considerate of the nuances and the limitations of the specific person or the specific outlet that they're working with. There are entirely different levels of familiarity and expertise and time. If you're working with, a local reporter at the Cascadia Daily News compared to perhaps a more senior, like investigative reporter who's putting together a 1-hour news segment on TV for a national audience. So I would suggest for all researchers, again, to when you're like first starting these interactions, ask some questions and be like, what's your deadline for this story? What's your familiarity with this topic? They might have just found you online. They might have come across a press release. And you really want to get some information so that you can position yourself and your research to fill whatever need or whatever story they're looking for. And then the last thing I'd probably say is feel empowered as a scientist to articulate to whatever journalist you're interacting with, like, listen, if there's one thing that you take away from this interview or from this science like story, this is what I want the audience to understand, because they're looking for a headline, they're looking for a soundbite, like that will be a requirement. They have, they're looking for clicks, they're looking for ad revenue. So anything that you can give them to make it easier and to ensure that the story gets out in the way that you want it, they will appreciate that. You can be the expert in that situation.
Yeah, I love several of the points you hit on. I now have to catch myself now in the future about referring to the media, and I will think about that a little more carefully. And another point that I think is really important for scientists that you touched on was about deadlines and timing. And that for better or worse, the scientific process is slow. It can take us to do a study and publish it years, in fact. But for, obviously for the media, those deadlines are often shorter and different. I just wonder if you could speak a little bit to, explain what these deadlines mean and how we can try to understand, that they needed quick turnarounds in some cases, like if it's TV, and just speak a bit on that.
Absolutely. I think the best example that I can give is this past spring at the iScore Open Science meeting. I was working with my supervisor, Dr. Heidi Roop, to put on kind of a supplemental climate journalism workshop, where we invited about a dozen journalists, ranging from kind of like big names in like CBS and NBC News to kind of more local reporters, to come and see and hear some of the science that was being presented at the meeting, and then also to kind of make connections and hopefully to support their networks moving forward. So when they have a story that they want to write about, they know the right people to go to. And one of the biggest takeaways that I had from that experience was how many of the journalists who came up to the actual meeting were literally working on filing their stories at the meeting. They were all like hunched over their laptops, sitting at like a little table over in the corner, and they'd say, I just got a call from my editor. I have to file the story in the next 2 hours. Like, I can't come on the field trip. Like, I'll loop back in with you at dinner. And so as someone who, again, kind of studies this, I've heard those stories. I understand the time crunches that they're under, but to be able to experience it in real time, and also to have conversations with journalists who are saying like, I normally write about politics, and now I'm being asked to like report on this story about health or something that I know nothing about. Like, they're just flipping through their phone looking for anyone who might know someone that could be useful. So we have Publisher Parish. They have like a whole like very similar sphere that puts a lot of pressure on them as well.
Great, thank you. And we can start taking questions if there's any from the audience. Again, feel free to either sort of raise your hand or throw them in the chat. While you're thinking, I'll sort of pose a general question to the panel. And as sort of early career researchers, all, having expertise or working in different areas as sort of communicating your science, I'm just curious sort of what the other sort of feedback from other scientists that you receive. Is it generally positive feedback, or negative feedback, or challenges that you face doing the science communication in addition to sort of your own scientific research?
I guess mine might be more low stakes than something that's definitely much more public facing. I've gotten a lot of good feedback. I think one of the nice things is that with a website, you can get passive feedback. You can see a lot of data about where people are logging in from, if they're looking at your website on a computer or if they're looking on a mobile device. It's really important when you're doing website design to figure out how your website is going to look if someone's looking on their phone. If everything is like really stretched out or scrunched down, then yeah, it's not as effective at communicating your information. So that's been really nice, being able to see like, oh, a lot of people are logging in from here, a lot of people are looking at it on mobile. I need to edit these things. I don't talk to a lot of people who look at my website, so I guess I don't get a lot of like personalized feedback that way. But I guess the feedback that I've gotten about how it looks has been good for me.
I can speak to kind of like a different angle. So it's interesting. I feel like, particularly being in the polar science community, I'm often like described as like a science communicator. But I actually consider myself to be a little bit more of an environmental communicator, which is like tangentially related, but is a little different in that science communication tends to associate more with what's the best way that we can communicate like this data in a way that makes sense to other people. And environmental communication tends to look at what are the ways that people are experiencing relationships with the natural world. And sometimes that involves understanding science and understanding data. And sometimes it's a lot more just about personal connections and relationships. And so some of the criticisms that I've gotten, and I think working in the polar science community, it's actually pushed me to expand my knowledge set a little bit more, is trying to lean more into the data, trying to do a little bit more of like evidence-based communication instead of just like, these are my thoughts and feelings, and like, this is how people like associate with stuff very generally. I think there's a lot to be said for being able to track and measure, and a lot of the stuff that kind of never crossed my mind as someone who's from a more like media oriented background. But I think that's a huge benefit. We need both. We need the relationships, but we also need kind of the accuracy and measurability.
And I'm sorry, do you mind restating the question? I was reading the one in the chat when you asked the one initially.
Yeah, no problem. Just sort of your thoughts on sort of feedback from other scientists, as you're doing your science communication, whether it's positive or negative, or other scientists interested in also, TikTok, or is there pushback, for using that app? Anything sort of around that?
So I think I guess the feedback, I would say, is that there's a lot of skepticism with TikTok sometimes, with like sort of, what is this app? Like, what is, how do you really use it well and wisely? And I think there's a little bit of apprehension with going into a place like TikTok. And I think my sort of rebuttal to that is everyone's TikTok looks different. Like if everyone had it on their phone right now and I said open it up and we just look to see what the videos are, I will guarantee you that my TikTok feed is going to look different than yours, for example. I know you said you use TikTok as well, and it's because that algorithm is so fine-tuned to the videos that you like. And the idea is that they're pushing content that you're interested in, that you're going to engage in, and ultimately it keeps you on the app, right? Like from a strategic perspective, that is the incentive why TikTok does that. But the beauty of that is that there are like subfields of TikTok's creators and content that can engage with so many different realms. So whether it's cooking, whether it's a nurse's TikTok, there's so many different niches that are really available, and that to me makes it really powerful and also capable of reaching many people very quickly. Like virality on TikTok is pretty fast, and it's remarkable how it works in that way, that you can reach a ton of people. And so I would say, like, yeah, I think the pushback from other scientists is a little bit just general apprehension about sort of functionality and things like that.
We do have a question in the chat for Austin that he alluded to. So Austin, did you need to take into account what organization or school you were working with when publishing videos in TikTok? Did you need to get permission to film? And this is from Sherry.
Thanks, Sherry. That's a great question. So a few things to that. In terms of permission from like the school or work, I didn't necessarily need to get permission to post content. At the end of the day, I'm posting content that is, I have ownership over, of the research that I'm doing and things like that. You do want to be mindful of the organizations that you represent. So for example, I'm not going to speak ill about the US Antarctic program on TikTok, for example. Like, I don't want, you have to be mindful of like the groups that you work with and that who may be seeing the video. And so that is something that you should take into account. In terms of permission, I personally say that anyone that will be featured on any content, video, or whatever that you will be posting online, you should definitely ask permission from them before posting. I think it's easy to just like take videos and post stuff and go about your day. But in the event that a video does gain popularity, now that person, whether or not they know it, is now being distributed across the internet. And so anything, I mean, that goes with anything on the internet, of course, but that's one thing I would say in terms of permission. Like, if there's people featured in any of the content, that's just important to get that permission. And also, if you are involved in specific science, it is good to acknowledge those that make that possible. So for example, if I post a video of us drilling an ice core, I want to acknowledge the ice core drilling program that makes that work possible. So in terms of permission, like sort of yes and no, but I think there's an intuition of like making sure people are aware that they will be featured and giving acknowledgements where credit is due. But in terms of getting permission before starting posting, that wasn't necessary for me.
We have another question in the chat from Susan, and I think this is for everyone. How do you decide who your audience is, and how do you gear your message to suit that audience?
I guess I can go first. Yeah, so I kind of mentioned this earlier, but my target audience is more broad. And I want to showcase more of my outreach and education experience that I have. So I try to make that a little more prominent when, at least I'm showing it on my website. In terms of the other places where I talk about my research, talking about my work, what I do, like ResearchGate and Twitter. ResearchGate is purely scientific. It's kind of like a social media site that's just for scientists. You post preprints, you post abstracts, you post full text of your paper, and you interact with other scientists about their work that they've posted, and you can ask and answer questions about virtually anything related to a scientific topic. So that's a really nice way of just putting your research out there and also allowing other people to read something that may or may not be behind a paywall normally. And then on Twitter, Zach, you can probably also speak to this pretty well. But my audience and the people that I interact with are almost exclusively polar scientists, because that's the audience that I have tailored my experience to. And that's the kind of content that I seek out. And I imagine, I don't use TikTok, but I imagine that that's how you also kind of curate your feed on other social media platforms like that.
Yeah, and I would also just add, like, in a space like TikTok, you really don't know who your audience will be when you're first starting. You kind of I would recommend just making content that you're excited about and passionate about, and then sort of determine who is watching these videos, and sort of see what the engagement is after. I mean, truthfully, I would be shocked if your audience is going to be all scientists on TikTok. I would, for example, my audience is not fellow scientists predominantly. It's people who happen to stumble upon like my video because they follow ASMR and I have a weird sound in one of my videos or something like that. You know, it's not necessarily going to be people who are familiar with the work. And so for me, I just sort of read the comments, see what people are saying, understand like who is engaging with the content. But I don't always want to like adjust my content for the followers in a way that like changes what I would authentically post. However, if it seems like people are really interested in seeing cool sights or sounds, or like sort of the creepy weird stuff about Antarctica, then maybe I'll lean more into that. And so it's not being inauthentic, but it's like seeing what people observe. Like I've noticed, for example, people tend to enjoy the videos where I'm present, where there's a human element, or you hear my voice. Those tend to do better than if I'm just showing you an ice core, for example. And so I think you just kind of have to sort of see what's people are engaging. And then there's also statistics on TikTok where you can see like your age distribution, your gender split, your cities and countries where most of your viewers are coming from. So all that you can take into consideration. But ultimately, I would say post what you want to post and be authentic to yourself and sort of read the room after.
I'll add a flip side to that. Oftentimes when you're engaging with a journalist, like that audience is kind of already predetermined. So I think it's much in the same way that you can like look up that kind of data stuff on like what sorts of people are looking at your TikTok. Like you can do research on a media outlet, on a journalist that's reached out to you and figure out like, what are their readership levels? Are they online or print? Those sorts of things. So a lot of that is going to be given, and you're going to know going into an interview, like, okay, if you're contacted by a reporter from National Geographic, that's going to be really different from Washington Post, which will be different from, whatever else. So you'll know.
I think I'll ask a next question. This is a little more geared, I think, to Catherine, but any of the panelists are welcome to join in. You mentioned earlier about sort of often journalists in their stories are looking for kind of a sound bite that for what, different purpose. And I'm wondering if you could provide any tips on how scientists can best think. We all can talk about our research for, lots of jargon and long, but do you have any recommendations for how we can really get, a nice sound bit or a summary of what the story is about?
Oh man, that's tough, because I've heard from many scientists that the advice they've received is like, pick one number, like focus on one number. And I think that can help. But in many ways, and I wish that journalists had more ability to kind of break out of this mold, but oftentimes they're looking for something that's, for lack of a better phrase, like crisis oriented. They're looking for something significant, or on the flip side, perhaps something like really hopeful. But my recommendation very generally tends to be like, is there a way that you can describe the effects of your research with some sort of analogy? I've done examples of like, well, what does sea level rise look like in practice? Because you might focus on a number. It's hard for people to maybe think about like how high is like 76 meters or something. But if I say that's about 2/3 the size of the Statue of Liberty, and you put up a picture of what the Statue of Liberty looks like with waves crashing on it, well, like maybe that'll stick with people a little bit more. So analogies are helpful, metaphors are helpful, focusing on one like significant number, those tend to really capture people's attention.
And also similarly, with short format videos, having a soundbite or something, a hook, is so important, because you have seconds before you lose someone to scroll to the next video. So if you don't capture someone's attention initially for like, the sort of main content of the video, then they're lost. And so like for me, like, for example, if I were to start a video that says, hey guys, my name is Austin, I'm a scientist, I study ice cores, you're gone. Like you've already scrolled. But if I said, here's how I cut ice from Antarctica, maybe you're like, oh, that's interesting. What is that? And then, hi, my name is Austin. And then you introduce yourself. So you kind of have to flip the script a little bit of like, what is the meat and potatoes of the thing that you're trying to communicate, and then maybe introduce yourself, or don't introduce yourself and just get right into it. But you do have to like think about it a little bit differently and start with your soundbite first.
Yeah,
I
Ariel.
have a picture of a polar bear. That's my hook. Because I don't have any sound, which is much more exciting. So the first thing you see on a website is a polar bear swimming, which feels a little bit like cheating because polar bears are charismatic megafauna. But I guess that's my visual hook. I feel like keep reading about cool science.
Can I add to that though? Because Ariel, I think, brings up a really excellent point. Visuals are so important, particularly in media communication, because it's really hard for us to imagine a lot of these stories. Like when I've spoken with journalists about like, what is it like to work out in the Antarctic field? Well, I don't know, but they're like, do you have pictures? Like, do you have video? Do you have the stuff that Austin is producing? Like, those are the things that the journalists want. They want visual elements. So anytime you can include a photo or some sort of other visual medium is really, really helpful.
I have a follow-up question, especially for Kate, but for everyone. When dealing with journalists and the media, do you also recommend a certain amount of caution? Because like if you're dealing with the Arctic and indigenous people, if they want a picture, they usually want people in it, but you don't want to use people as a prop. Or they often want to know, well, what do the indigenous people of Greenland think? I'm not the one that should be telling you what they think. So what do you recommend to deal with those kinds of questions and issues?
I think that's a really excellent point. My best advice would be to say, well, if you have hesitancy about it, who can you connect them to who can better address that? And I have gotten questions from people about like, what can you tell me about like Alaskan, like Arctic type stuff? And I'm like, I mean, I can tell you like the limited research that I've done, but I would actually suggest that you talk to this other scientist or this other community member. And so if you have a photo of a person, perhaps from the Arctic, do you know that person? Like, could you just give that journalist their contact info and they can follow up with them? You're right that I think people can be helpful and you don't want to use them as props in those images, but I think the landscape imagery, the polar bears, like it doesn't just have to be people. There's a lot more than just the human element. The natural environmental element can also be very powerful.
Thank you very much. This is open to everyone. Oh, it looks like we have another question from the audience. This is also from Sherry. She asks, are any of you members of science communication organizations, and would you recommend any?
I am not a member of any organizations, so I'm actually curious if the other panelists have recommendations.
I'm also not, but I've been to a lot of workshops that are hosted by people who are maybe their own science communication network. There is a really great one, and I wish I remembered her name. If anyone knows this, Science as Storytelling, I believe that's the right one. But the AGU conference every year, she hosts a wonderful workshop and panel about how talking about your science is basically like telling a story, and it's the best way to communicate effectively to a really broad audience. So that's something that I would recommend looking up. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm also not part of a specific network.
So I have a shameless plug. I would recommend that everyone check out the International Environmental Communication Association. And I say that because I serve on the board. But I also say that because they do a really excellent biannual conference. So every 2 years. This past year, they hosted their conference in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. And I think it's an incredible experience because it gathers not just researchers and scientists and people kind of doing science communication, but also a lot of practitioners, policymakers, artists, teachers. It's really like an accepting environment for anyone who's kind of interested in science and the environment very broadly. The next conference will be in 2025 in Hobart, Tasmania. And they're really looking actually for polar scientists because Tasmania is a big jump off point for a lot of Antarctic research. So the conference planning committee is actually looking for people who like have connections with the Antarctic Research Center and like would be interested in touring an icebreaker and stuff like that. So I would highly recommend that association. We're undergoing a lot of updates to our system and website kind of in advance of the next conference, but would be happy to answer any questions you might have about them. And they're a good jumping off point for a lot of other kind of science and environmental associations.
I have a kind of general question. So, okay, let's pretend, I'm really excited to do science communication. I have some sort of creative video or posts or whatnot. I'm happy to share that. But how do you grow a following? How do people find you? And what are your suggestions for that? And we talked a little bit about, like, for instance, TikTok has this algorithm, but to me, it's still a bit of a mystery when I'm on. So I'm just curious, anyone's advice on sort of how to be found?
That is such a good question, and super important to think about when you are trying to get involved with launching a science persona. I don't know if people have heard of the term SEO before, like search engine optimization. Like, how can you find something easily on the internet? And with videos, the algorithm can only push your content out to people based on what you give it. So by giving it a location, giving it a descriptive type like caption, using trending hashtags, using trending sounds, any text you put on your video, which is why I always recommend editing in the app, that also gets fed to the algorithm. So it takes all of this information that you can give it as much as possible, and then it will push that content out accordingly. And so in terms of sort of reaching people, you do need to think carefully about like the sort of words that you can use to associate with whatever content, post or video, and that really will help you a lot. And honestly, in a place like TikTok, you just have to just keep posting. I think when you do it the first time, your inclination is to like check it every hour. Just who's watching it? How many views does it get? It doesn't really work like that. Like, you do need to just like, there's a momentum and a bit of an inertia. You just kind of have to keep doing what you like and just be passionate about it and trust the process. And all it takes is just one video to kind of gain popularity, and then people will go back to your other videos, and then those all can potentially take off in their own right. So I say just being consistent and being conscious of the sort of words that you use to get people to find that content.
I will add to that only to say I don't really have social media. I, like Ariel, have a website. I keep that updated. I have LinkedIn that I like keep updated, but don't really like utilize. But I think that ensuring that you're creating content and keeping that content updated, that's like really, really important. I recently attended like how to brand yourself, like environmental communication workshop. And the guy who came to lead it was wonderful. And he had a really beautiful website, but he was like, I haven't updated this in 10 years. And the whole audience was like, what are you saying? So anytime that you're doing like a new research project, you've participated in a new workshop, you have a new degree or certification, like make sure that those things are showing up on your website or your LinkedIn or whatever it is you've chosen to use, because people will pay attention to that and it can help them find you.
Yeah, I would also say that I think a key part of growing a following is figuring out what your niche is. And I think as scientists, that's actually pretty easy because our research is our niche. And it doesn't have to be the only thing that you do or you talk about. Like, I really love super cheesy disaster movies, and it like fits really well with my research. So I can kind of merge those things together sometimes when I talk about them. But yeah, like figuring out what what you really like talking about, like what Austin has said, and what you're good at talking about. I think that's a good way of figuring out who your audience might be and who really wants to see your content.
And also just to add, I think just to hit home, like that being consistent point is like, building a trust with your audience is super important. So if I go to your website and there's just only one blog post and that's the only blog post that you have, maybe I'm like, I don't know what the situation is. But if you have a ton of things or a ton of videos, then people are like, oh, this person has a platform or has there's a little bit more of a trust involved. And so I always say, like, don't delete things. Like, I look back at the first video I posted and it's like, it's so cringy, but it's like, that is something I'm not going to delete because it's like part of the process of learning and kind of finding your own and like having sort of a suite of videos that people can be like, oh, like he posts regularly or whatever. And I haven't posted in a while, but to have sort of a trust. And I think that goes with a lot of different applications. Yeah.
So I'm curious, I have a bit of follow-up. It might be a tricky question. So we talked about, content and creating new content and being consistent. So I'm curious, what about how do you have the time or any recommendations on when you do this? We're all busy, but you're all, doing wonderful efforts in this area. So I'm just curious, when do you find the time to do such? Is it tied to your sort of your job, or you do it in your free time? And just any thoughts on that?
I think of updating kind of like updating a CV. Like when something new happens or when I do something, I'm just like, yep, put that up there. I think mine's a little bit easier because it doesn't, like updating a website doesn't take a lot of the same editing and creative power that I assume making a TikTok video or even like coming up with a really great tweet does. But yeah, kind of making it a habit of just like, okay, something new has happened. Just like I'm adding a line to my CV, I'm adding a new item to the website.
I agree with Ariel. I keep very limited like platforms because you have to keep them updated and you have to do it consistently. And so I do it about once a semester. I'm like, okay, what awards do I need to swap out? Like, do I have a new position, something else? But yeah, about every 6 months.
And I know I kind of alluded this in my last comment. I haven't posted in a while, and truthfully, I just got super busy. Like I was doing my qualification exam, and so I needed to I deleted all of my social media apps so I could focus on just writing, because it can be a distraction. It can be like a healthy distraction, but it can be an unhealthy distraction. And so I think there has to be sort of like setting a boundary of like, okay, like where do I need to put my energy and how much time can I dedicate? And I think it's up to you to decide how much you want to put into it, and how consistent you want to be, and find a rhythm that works best for you. When I was in Antarctica, it was easy to be a little bit more consistent with that. In my day-to-day life, it's a little bit challenging with different competing obligations and stuff like that. So I think finding a rhythm that works for you, and going from there.
Speaking of healthy boundaries, we do have a question for Austin in the chat. Austin, have you ever had issues in your comments that you've had to moderate? And this is also from Sherry.
Okay, good question. So this is something I feel like we should throw an asterisk on. Is so being online, there is a different form of social etiquette, right? If I posted a video and I started introducing myself, and you were bored, you could just scroll away. If I were in person talking to you and I was like, hi, my name's Austin, I'm an ice course, and you walked away mid-sentence, I'd be like, oh, wait a while. So you lose that social etiquette with online platforms. And I think that's important to know because it can be a little vulnerable posting yourself online if you choose to put your face in the videos or put your face into any visuals or anything. And as you reach audiences and TikTok, you can reach a lot of people very quickly. You will reach amazing people, but you will reach trolls. And like there are people exist on the internet who are trolls, and there's you have to sort of be prepared that, you can't please everyone. And so just know, like, when you go into it, just being sort of being confident with yourself and being authentic and sticking to that and sort of ignoring those comments. You do have the option to delete comments, of course, that are offensive and rude. So there, if in terms of moderation, if you want to do that, you can do that. And there might be a way to moderate certain words too. I think that might be an update. I can't remember, but yeah, that's just one thing to point out there, is just being online can be a vulnerable experience, and going into it knowing that is important, and just being sort of aware that, for me, it's been a lesson of, like, you can't please everyone, and I'm totally a people pleaser in my day-to-day life. And so that has been sort of a reflection piece on my own of, like, do what you love. Some people will love it, some people may not, and that's totally fine.
That's really great. Thanks so much. And that was a great question.
Have you had any surprises? Like anything that you didn't expect would happen from really kind of being out there in the public all the time?
I guess if that's for any of us, I still remember the first time that a journalist reached out to me and was like, I read your paper and I'm wondering if you'd like be interested in being featured in this story. And I was like, what? Like, I'm a grad student. You don't want to talk to me. And it wasn't anything big. It was like it was like a student like newspaper type thing over at Columbia University or something. Like, it wasn't massive, but it was a really great feeling to be like, someone considers me to be important. They saw me online somewhere and they like want to like quote me. Like, that's kind of awesome. It's a nice surprise, a good feeling.
Yeah, I think I've been surprised with similarly sort of like talking to people about my research, like, and people are familiar with it from my videos or something. And so, for example, if there was a time where I was getting my hair cut and I was talking about Antarctica, because I was like, why not talk about Antarctica while I'm getting my hair cut? And they were like, oh yeah, I saw this one video once that they like dropped a camera down the borehole. And I'm like, oh my God, that was me. And, and it's, the point is that I'm not trying to make myself memorable. I'm trying to make the science memorable. And the fact that they did click that and sort of put like, getting the idea of like ice core science into people's like mind and making it more mainstream and tangible, to me is an awesome feeling. And that's sort of the main objective of this is to kind of get that out there and get that reaching audiences who normally would not reach.
So I see we're coming up with just a few minutes left of the webinar. So I just wonder if any of the panelists have any takeaway messages for folks about your own experiences with communicating or how to get started. Any final thoughts?
I guess enthusiasm, I would say, is the main takeaway that I don't know if it's really a takeaway, but I think being enthusiastic about what you're communicating and how you're communicating it, even if it's something that someone is not super interested in, if someone is communicating really enthusiastically about something that has like any intrinsic interest to anybody, and it's a good way of at least telling people about the science and showcasing the science, even if, as Austin said, you're not really showcasing yourself. Like, you're not the spotlight, the stuff that you do, because everything that we do is super cool. It's super interesting. And it's really good to share that with people.
And don't be afraid to have fun with it. Like, not all of my videos are formal science communication. I mean, there's a video of me flying on a shovel, like in the middle of Antarctica. And that's not direct science communication, but it is getting people excited about Antarctica and engaging people in a way that wouldn't normally be engaged. So, I think don't lose your personality by trying to stick to just this, like, I'm only going to talk about science. And maybe that's what you want to do, and that's totally fine. But it's also fine to sprinkle in things that are a little bit outside of the box of, have fun with what you're doing. Like that's the point of this. It's not unless this is your job, it doesn't have to be like that.
And I'd add, from a journalistic perspective, journalists and media reporters are looking for your personality. Like, they want to know what it's like to, like, how do you get water in Antarctica? That's frankly a lot more appealing to them and easier to sell to an editor than like new radar technology. Like, the human element is really critical.
All right, thanks. I think we're coming to an end, so I'd like to give a big virtual round of applause for our panelists and this really excellent conversation about sort of being online and talking about our science and our work. We're just going to go to one little slide. So thanks again for joining the USAPECS webinar. Just point out, we are sort of looking for new board members over the next couple of weeks. So if you're interested in sort of joining or becoming more involved with USAPECS, feel free to reach out in the email, or we'll soon be posting a call if you're interested in sort of joining the board. And we're going to have another webinar in a couple of weeks that's going to be talking with actually directors from our Polar Film Fest and sort of have a roundtable discussion with them. And feel free, we do use Wix, as was mentioned here. So check out our website again to get more involved. And thanks again for everyone tuning in. I'd just like to ask the panelists just to stay around for just a few minutes after. But thanks again, everyone.